Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. You know, many leaders today are still struggling with issues around managing teams in a virtual workplace. It takes a combination of skills to communicate clearly, to hold people accountable, and to achieve the desired results. I'm very excited to have as my guest today someone who is an expert in this area. So if you've been struggling with this, you'll want to take some notes because you're going to get some great answers. I'd like to welcome Dr. Ron Beach. Welcome, Ron.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so excited about our conversation, and I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Jeanette Sibley, who is the one who introduced us. Jeanette is a former guest on my show, and she's a colleague of both of ours and just does a wonderful job of connecting. Before we get started, Ron, let me tell my audience a little bit about you because you have such an interesting and varied background. Ron is an organizational sociologist with a PhD in organization and management. He's now at the University of Arizona Global Campus, where he serves as the lead faculty for the Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration within the Forbes School of Business and Technology. Before that, Ron had more than 25 years of experience as a manager in high-tech manufacturing at companies like Western Digital and Hitachi. Ron is also an award-winning author of 7 books, and today we're going to be diving into 2 of them, The Virtual Divide and The Virtual Bridge. Ron is also a Marine Corps vet. And Ron, I want to thank you so much for your service as we get started. As we jump in, I didn't go into detail about everything in your illustrious career. So tell us a little bit about your journey to the work that you're doing today at the University of Arizona and how you learned so much about working with virtual or remote teams.
Yeah, I have a pretty weird background. And the fact that my parents, I was raised in as entrepreneurs. You know, they owned bars, restaurants, hotels, trailer parks, and we'd move about once a year.
Mm.
So my sister was one of those that she was into the social side, and I wasn't. I was a book person, so kind of going through. And so I went for a while. I went to a 2-room schoolhouse on the desert in Arizona. And so as I think about it, you know, I'm a late bloomer to academia, right? And so, you know, after high school, you know, I joined the Marines, did one tour overseas, which by the way, today's Vietnam Veterans Day, and you know, it's my Marine Corps training had laid the groundwork for my whole career. Besides being trained in electronic countermeasures, you know, that I used in my career in manufacturing. I used my career in academic universities, and it's just been it's been a fun travel, you know, all the way. And so my parents, you know, it's hard to go to college or school when you don't have anyone to mentor you or to speak with. My dad went to 2 years of high school. My mom never went to high school at all. And so they couldn't relate. My mom's idea of an expert is someone she can see on Oprah. And so she really couldn't relate in that aspect. And it just, you know, I joined the Marines and life kind of gets in the way sometimes. But I took my skills in the Marines of tenacity, learned how to stick to a project to completion. Marines may not be speedy, but we are persistent in accomplishing. And I went back to school at 40 for my bachelor's degree. because I'd gone to night school. In fact, my first correspondence course was on the Laotian border during the war. So when you look at my transcript, it took me 25 years to get my bachelor's degree. Then I got my master's at 47 and my PhD at 50. And so I'm kind of on the other end. So I can relate to the students who are going to school, similar to this. I can relate to the supervisors and managers, the people who I specifically target in my books, because managers, directors, they get the skills training, the management training, they go to seminars. Normally the supervisors are on the job, mentoring, your manager will mentor you. The problem is the managers don't have time. It's not that they don't care. They just don't have time to really give you the guidance. So I try to fill that bridge in with my books. And so it's been a fun ride. I'm actually at the point now is I have so much to say. I went into academia as an associate dean of 25 degree programs online, 45,000 students, a couple hundred faculty, full-time faculty, then you have a few hundred associate faculty. And so I've learned from doing the issues, the communication issues, the hardships that working remotely is different than working in an office, and try to communicate in activities. And so I took all that to kind of, how can I go a little further? How can I take this out to my students in a written format? Because my books are basically short read books, 100 to 130 pages, to make it so they can actually read it in time frames they have. And it's just with COVID-19, it pushed so many managers and supervisors into the remote world with no training.
Mm-hmm.
They think they're going to run it the same way as an office, and they're not. You may have the same basic skills, but you use them differently with different emphasis, going through. And so it's just been, and timing is perfect because it's not going away. It's going to be staying with us with a blended workforce. So it's become more complicated when you look at adding part of your work week's going to be in the office, part of your work week's going to be remote. Maybe you're doing international instead, which is a different set of situations to kind of contend with. So it's not going to go away. And so now is the perfect time to kind of think about how you're going to manage your teams.
Right. Well, it's interesting because you have the two books, The Virtual Divide and The Virtual Bridge. So one of them you wrote before COVID ever hit, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
So it's interesting how you were being, something of a, I don't know about a forecaster, but certainly anticipating trends that you were seeing and looking at how to help organizations prepare for that. Talk about each one of the books and what the purpose was, what the distinction is between the Virtual Divide and the Virtual Bridge.
Oh, good. The Virtual Divide, which was the very first back, was very basic, looking at the different talking about the technologies, the introduction of technology and how it's going to change the manner of how you manage groups and organizations. Then it was talking about how can team members actually be managed remotely. And I introduced them to, everybody knows Myers-Briggs personality profiles.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the best kept secrets in the United States is the Belkin team roles, which is used in Europe and Asia and in Australia. They don't use Belkin. And I used it in manufacturing, and it was just phenomenal. So now I'm using it to say, all right, this is what you can use in your remote teams to say, how can you kind of look at things maybe a little different? Think about a football team. You can have a Super Bowl, you have two fantastic, great teams, but one of them's going to be a winner, right? Is because the coach really knows how to use the skills of his team, his individual people, to their best advantage as a group. And that's what you're going to do with a remote team. So the first book was to kind of lay the groundwork, and I give some examples of some of the hardships people are going through working from home. They're trying to share an low band internet with the family who wants to play their games, or the kids that are trying to work in the living room, or the stresses. and things we can do to help them. At the end of each chapter is a what we call virtual nuggets, little things that you can do with your teams. The second book takes it a little further on past the forming the teams. Now you're talking about how to actually manage the teams, how to hire the right people, right? How to do the onboarding, and the challenges that you're going to have. Think about, we have a whole new generation of people who are going to be joining the online team, remote teams, that they have a different emphasis and a different take than what we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
Universities all over across the country, essentially, they don't even have late policies anymore. Post when you can. Don't worry about the due dates or the assignments, which is contrary to the business side. Because we have timelines, we have projects and everything. So how do you develop the culture when you hire these people in the onboarding? How do you create the culture to let them know there's expectations and value to being on time on projects, or we communicate the issues? Then, because I introduced them to scorecarding and activities, something very simple they can do to kind of keep them track, and kind of what I call how they hit those speed bumps. You're going to have speed bumps as you go through. Life will toss in speed bumps for your people. Life will put speed bumps in the way of you as a manager. So, in the Marines, we had a saying: improvise, adapt, overcome, succeed. So how do you go over, under, around, or through those speed bumps to reach your goals, and still have that, the ways of addressing issues? And I'm one of the ways that I really believe that people are basically good. They need guidance. Everybody has a button. Sometimes you can find it, sometimes you can't. But so I think as a manager, I approach it from that way, which is not the way I started with in the Marine Corps. Believe me, that kind of evolved over the years.
Well, let's go a little deeper in all three of those. Let's look at the hiring, which in itself is an interesting challenge when, assuming you've got the remote team, and also the onboarding or even attracting the right talent. What are some tips that you can give folks that are struggling with bringing on the right people and getting them to buy into the culture, the goals, and the results that they're looking for?
That's a great question. Every organization has their own corporate culture. And it's not saying there's a right or wrong, they're just different. Some are very results oriented, some are very social active instead, or the culture of care type environment. And so really you have to kind of design it around your culture, what you're going to go in. And think about the advantages that this remote field has. My gosh, before you used to, your people you could hire had to be people from a few blocks of the factory, a few blocks from the office. Now you can hire the very best from all around the world. And so you have to really decide, what is it you're wanting? This is why I look at team roles. You don't want to have a team where everybody's a captain. You're not going to win very much. So you have to really look at what's your mission, what kind of team you're going to be, projects you're going to be working, and what are the type of roles to bring people in. That's why I kind of introduced the team roles in the first book. So they can kind of say, all right, okay, this person really likes to do analytical. I can see them doing reports. This one's the social one who can maybe represent us in different team meetings, different groups. So you're looking at it in a kind of different perspective. Now you're looking at putting a puzzle together. And then you look at, I lay out in the first book a template for the onboarding, the things that kind of checklist to bringing them in. What kind of equipment, what kind of communications, what kind of software, what kind of meeting schedule, right? And how do you manage to set the expectation? You say, right, over the next week, you're going to talk to 2 different department heads, and next week I'm going to ask you to report on it. Right? And the first thing you do, you want to say, right, here's the expectation, and I expect you to come back and you're going through it. But you're doing it in a way that's positive reinforcement. You're trying to help them be successful. Right? One thing I learned in the Marine Corps is a non-commissioned officer, you're the barrier buster, right? You're the one who is a resource person. You want that new employee to feel that they can come to you with a problem or they're going through. It can be pretty lonely out there in that remote world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to create the culture of saying, and there's ways of actually doing it where they feel like they're part of a team, but it's how to make them where they feel like they're actually part of something bigger than themselves. And that as a challenge, but that's also the fun part.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is when you don't have everyone together, the idea of getting them to feel the excitement and feel the energy of others on the team. Is that something where you would bring people together on, say, a Zoom call or some kind of an online meeting if you can't get together in person? So you help generate that kind of enthusiasm and camaraderie.
Actually, I kind of have a different approach. Uh, two prong, and I wrote about it in the first book. Once a week, I get with every person individually on the phone, a phone call, not a video, but a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And what we talk about is anything but work. Because what you're trying to do is establish that rapport, that relationship, and have them
Mm-hmm.
looking at you as not being the boss, the manager, or the director. And you're not looking at it just as a person who's doing a job, making that connection. That's the culture part.
Mm-hmm.
The Zoom call is when you're getting together as a team, but instead of think about when you have a meeting, an on-ground meeting in a conference room, you see people sit down, and as soon as you see them getting comfortable in the chair, you've extended that meeting 45 minutes. And so how do you respect people's time? How do you lay out an agenda for the meeting? You keep it short, keep it sweet, and you keep it where it's supporting.
Mm-hmm.
And and they get to where they get to where they respect your time and you're respecting theirs. Don't go be rearranging your schedule every week. Well, I have to redo your schedule. I have to move it out and meet. Their priority, their meeting, my meeting schedule with the people is I schedule everything else around them because that's a critical element.
Mm-hmm.
And have even with a social faculty who are part timers, teaching classes. I keep them informed. What's going on? I want them to feel that our University of Arizona Global Campus, that's the place you want to work. We're the best place to be, and you have to make them where they feel like part of something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Going
Well,
through.
let's go deeper with that. Ron, I'd love for you to share because you have, I think you had told me 2 full-time and 82 adjunct faculty that
Yes.
you're responsible for working with. So here you are applying what you teach in your book. So I would love for you to talk about what does that look like? How do you go about structuring these weekly calls and covering important topics with folks?
Yeah, it's really kind of really interesting because not everybody has courses being taught at the same time, or there may be a transition between them. Or I got a joke that I have 86 opportunities to get in trouble. Right? And so when you have several thousand students and you're trying to respond to their issues of going through, there's time where an instructor may have someone who's a CPA. All of a sudden, you get to the tax time, and maybe they're not in the classroom as much as they should be. So you draw an email, just kind of nudge them a little bit. But there's times, most of the time, I'll call them on the phone. I'll say, "Hey, Steve, let's bond." You know, that's our way of just saying, "All right, we need to talk about something." Most time is I can help them. They just need to be able to feel free to reach out. As an adjunct, you're afraid of doing anything that might get you in the bad look of the school because then you won't get contracts. And so you're trying to create that culture, that environment where it's just the opposite. Saying you're here because you're the best of the best already. My job is to help you do it and get it to the students. And so you have to be willing to invest. The one thing managers and directors have so little of time. I don't know of any director who's been able to say, I can spend as much time doing my strategic thinking as I like to, because you're putting out forest fires all the time. But just a little bit of making that connection, getting them to understand, they're not there by themselves, and you're willing to help them going through. I think that's the biggest thing you can do. And sometimes just the offer, and just they may never come to you about the problem, but the thing is, you've made the offer. You put that in your hand out there. Say, I'm not giving you a hand out. I'm giving you a hand up. I'll help you on it. And so it really does make a difference. That's the culture difference. They're still expecting results.
Yes, for those who do feel time constrained and maybe haven't put forth this effort for relationship building in the past, when you're advising some of these leaders who come to you with this kind of challenge, how do you help them see the situation differently so they see it as an investment of their time as an investment in the relationship? See, in other words, helping them see the benefits of taking the time to do this.
Well, the first thing I kind of do with somebody is I find out what's their pain points, what's causing them stress. What type of you get in, you turn on your computer and you see an email from John Jones. Oh no, I don't want to read that. How to use your time, and most time when you get into those issues of what's their pain points, then you're actually able to kind of grow it around saying, all right, let's design something that's more for you. Maybe it's, are you feel that you're slow and making decisions, right? But you're not, I'm going to put on my academic hat a little bit. An adult makes 35,000 remote conscious decisions every day. Right? We use statistics every day, but you say decisions and statistics, people's blood pressure goes up. So it's just how they look at it more than the object itself. And sometimes they just need help to kind of look at it from a different perspective. Right? Again, they wouldn't be in that position if they weren't good at what they were doing, because the management wouldn't have hired them. But you get to where you have that self-doubt. Sometimes you feel like you're managing your organization by your fingertips on the edge there. And so then you have to get with them and say, all right, let's narrow the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. Now let's narrow the scope of how you're trying to get it. It's that sphere of influence. And as your team becomes more self-directed, you can step out a little more. And then you'd be surprised. At Hitachi, I found out when I implemented teams that the main roadblock they had to implement teams was me. I had everything funneled through me. Still. And once and it's hard to kind of let loose some of those controls where you're still responsible, and you have to give them the opportunity and permission to try something and fail. So it just makes going through, and you're doing the same thing with on remote teams. You're using the same skills, but you're doing a different emphasis: communications, empathy, understanding, and you're maybe having to spend a little more of your time. Going through.
I think that's so critical, the empathy part, because if we don't make the effort to understand what someone else is experiencing, I think it's impossible for them to feel connected to you in a way that they'll go that extra mile for you. Don't you think, well, I don't want to set up a question, but it just seems to me in my experience, and I bet it's true for you too, Ron, when you demonstrate to someone you really care about them, it makes a huge difference in their reciprocal commitment to you.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a consultant that I met at a training conference decades ago, and he said something that stuck with me. He goes, no one washes a rental car. So what he was saying is, unless people feel ownership, they're not going to take care of it. And then, so that's the difference between having a mediocre performing group and a world-class performing group. How to make them want to do it as much as you want it. Okay? That's where that time commitment from you, making that bridge with them comes across. And give them the opportunity to try something where they don't feel threatened. Let them try something. They say, well, that really didn't work out so well, did it? So let's take a look at what could we have done differently. And next time you try something, every step, good and bad, is a learning process. And it's a brick that builds that bridge. So yes.
Mm-hmm. And what kinds of things can managers do to make someone or help someone feel safe in experimenting, in trying things, even if the
Oh,
result is not what they hoped it would be?
that's tough. That's tough because sometimes when I talk about that corporate environment, some corporations they do shoot the messenger. And so it's you're sometimes you may be going contrary to your corporate, you want to give people more room to try things, and your company won't back you up on that. Or if something doesn't go to plan, you get nailed. And actually, I kind of even when I have conversations with people, I'll back it up with an email. They have an idea. Well, I thought about trying this. Right? Then you say, okay, do it. And I follow up with an email back to them. Say, John, that was a great idea of giving this a shot. Let's try it. Let's take it out for a spin. What happens? And get back with me on X, such date, and let's review it. That way they know that you're writing in writing, showing them yes, they got the okay to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're also showing that you're wanting them to be successful, but you're going to be willing to work with them in case it's not.
That is such an important point that you're bringing up, this idea of follow-up, and not just having this conversation where you think you were clear, or you thought you were clear in hearing what they said they wanted to do, but the opportunity to really follow up, to clarify and express your support, and also holding them accountable to get back to you. I think that's where a lot of times the disappointments or frustration or even anger can come in, when we have in our minds an idea of what the person should do, but we haven't been as clear as we could have been.
I had a project I worked on for a long time. I mean, had to do with performance reviews, what we call IQRs. And I'm doing all this, and I presented the results to the dean, and the dean says, "That's not what I wanted." I said, "Well, we had a meeting, we discussed, and it still was not making a connection what she wanted and what I developed, and that was really discouraging."
Mm-hmm.
So, I could have made probably that if I wrote an email to her saying, "Okay, here's how I understand the assignment, or what you want from me."
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I didn't do that. And so it can be that communication that you may think it takes a lot of time, but it doesn't. Just even a quick sentence or two, and just saying, "You've got the permission to try this." Or if you need additional resources, drop me a note. Let me see what I can do to help.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, they're
Well,
not there alone.
yeah, you're talking about shared responsibility. So it isn't on just one person, but it's this whole thing of having an atmosphere where we both commit to making sure we're clear on what it is that's supposed to get done, who's going to do it, by when, so that there aren't disappointments on either side.
Actually, the next book, and that's will be out probably in August, is called The Virtual Magnet.
Magnet?
Yes, and it's about how to put the right people together in a team for projects and activities. If you think about the magnet, what happens when you put the two of the same poles together? They push each other apart.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Ones who are opposite attract, they pull together. And so there's actually different type of skills, personality skills, that they work well together. But there's certain other ones that says, all right, this is your strength, but these are certain type of people that they don't play together really well, not because they're bad people. It's just that they have a different emphasis in their mind, the analytical or the social or the type. And that's what I'm getting into the next one. So, yeah.
What else is in your latest book that you feel might be helpful for my listeners to be aware of and to think about?
Believe it or not, it's the onboarding process.
Okay.
Because the onboarding process, now sometimes you have a team that's already in place, but you can still use some of the basic tools of making sure of people accountability. You're trying to create an atmosphere. You're trying to create a culture, and that takes time. And so, when I meet with people, now I have different luxury than a lot of people, but I'll say when I hire someone full time, I go, you know what my expectation is my first year? No, I don't have one. It's going to take them that long to understand the culture, the activities of a university, the committees, and all this other stuff, and learning how to work with adjuncts and all this other stuff. You only spend 25% of your time in the classroom, everything else going through. So it's a different world than what they come in. So I don't want them to have the pressure of set expectations. Now, do we meet each other? Oh, yeah. But it's a different kind of atmosphere of going through. And so I really think onboarding is where you set the pace, you set the culture, you set the tone of your team, you set the tone of your expectations of what you expect them to do on projects or activities. And so many companies, when you're brought into a team, it's okay, here's your first assignment. If you have a problem, call me. And I can understand that because sometimes you hire late and bring them in, right in the middle of a project, but you can still look at it and you can readapt the onboarding process because you still want to make that cultural connection.
Is there a particular length of time that you would say a typical company might allot for the onboarding process? And what's involved in having it go well? What should it consist of?
Actually, it kind of goes in stages. You can do the initial stages in about 6 weeks. I'm talking about where they learn all the different departments, the roles, the activities, and they're getting to connect with people. It's very structured. Because Mary, this is where you're setting not just the activity, but the atmosphere of there's an expectation that you'll accomplish these activities in this time frame. Right? And when you get beyond 6 weeks, first of all, you'll know pretty much, is that person going to fit into your group on activity? And so then you're getting into how to fine tune them going further out. You start giving a little more responsibility, a little more room for try ideas. Say 9 months they've been there. Well, you've been here a while. Meredith, what's your idea about how this particular type of project? What can we do differently? We need new eyes, new ideas. Wow, you want to know my opinion? Sure. And so it takes up. But that first 6 weeks, that's critical. That's where you need to make sure you invest the time for those communications. We had kind of an adage, people take care of the company has to take care of the people. And so at a supervisor, that's the hardest position in all of corporate because they're having to balance the people's needs and the company's needs. Right? And that's why I kind of aim my scope of my writing in that room. So I write it as if you're the supervisor level. How are you doing this? You can adapt it going through. But invest the time. You may not think you have it, but invest the time and it pays itself back. Companies are not benevolent associations. They have expectations. They have financial needs. They have good people because they have a service or product they're trying to deliver to help somebody. And so you have to be able to do that balancing act between the people's needs and the company's needs. But that's the fun part too.
Yeah, that's, it goes back to the investment in time in those relationships and also upfront, because what you're really doing is saving time over the long run. And I think this is the thing that when we get our blinders on and we're kind of short-sighted with the task at hand or the project deadline, we can lose sight of the fact that if we take a little bit of time here to invest in this person, in this relationship, it's going to pay so many dividends down the road. And I think that's similar to what you're saying in onboarding. There's a greater chance of success long-term if you take the time, especially during those first 6 weeks, to help see, do we have a really good match here? And am I doing what I can to help them get the lay of the land and understand how we do things around here, what our culture is like, so we can both agree this is a great match and then move towards being more highly productive down the road.
There's nothing more energy draining to a manager than an HR issue, an employee issue. And so it's one is you want to make sure the best you can to bring in the right people, the right culture, the right mix to the team. Every time you bring someone else new to a team, there is a wave of change that's going to impact the team. You need to understand what that is because it's natural, it's real, it's going to happen. And so as long as you can see it, you can plan for it, you can manage to it. And just, when you have a performance issue, how are you going to handle a performance issue? How are you going to document it? How are you going to create an action plan? How are you going to respond and manage to it? So the best employees I ever had were the ones that were my problem children that I had to turn around. Like I said, everybody has a button. Sometimes it takes a while to find it. Sometimes you can't, and you have to make that hard decision. But when you can find that button, they become your best employees. So it's worth the time.
It's such an important point. And oftentimes it starts with us and our own attitude towards that individual and our willingness and openness to work with them, to identify what the issue is from their perspective, and then work through it. Ron, this has been so helpful. Is there any final tip that you might want to share with my audience before we wrap up?
Well, it's just that when someone's in a position, supervisor, manager, director, you're there because you're good at what you do. They wouldn't have put you there in the first place. All you're doing with my books or courses or podcasts, you're trying to, how do I improve it going forward? Right? And when you're trying to change your way while you're within the same company, it takes time. Give yourself time, but give yourself some honesty. What are your pain points? What's your stress? What do you need to kind of make it better? Is it impacting your family life? That balance. What can we do to make it better? And you normally can. It just takes time.
That's great. Thank you, Ron. I so appreciate your joining me today on this topic that I know is important for just about every one of my listeners, because there's at least some aspect in most businesses today that's remote or virtual, whether it's how many days you come in or how many people are coming in. There's so many different dynamics that have to be juggled. So I know many of my listeners will be interested in your book. So please share how they can connect with you, get copies of your books, and learn more about your work.
Sure. My book's available at Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble and all small bookstores. Or you can just come to my website, ronaldbeach.com, drop me a note, and I'll work with you going through there.
That's great. Well, Ron, let's review your books, The Virtual Divide and The Virtual Bridge. And coming up in
The Virtual Magnet.
Late summer is The Virtual Magnet. So that's wonderful. Thank you for the contributions you're making, both to the workplace and to higher ed in the current work that you're doing. It's wonderful to have someone like you that has the enjoyment and the energy and commitment to really have a positive impact. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you giving me the platform to speak, to kind of get my word out. I admire what you're doing on all your podcasts. I reviewed the different ones you've had. Phenomenal. So I really appreciate that as well.
Thanks, Ron. Well, we will stay in touch.
You bet.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.